The reporter isn't supposed to be part of the story. But for journalist Brandi Morin, there came a time when it was painfully clear that the story she was reporting on could just as easily have been about her. Devastating loss, abuse, oppression. But as her new memoir also reveals, strength, clarity, and the bravery to seek justice. It's called Our Voice of Fire, a memoir of a warrior rising. Brandi Morin is an internationally recognized French Cree Iroquois journalist, and she joins us now in our studio. It's so nice to meet you in person. This book, before we came on camera, I said that there's a lot of things that you wrote about in here that are painful to talk about. So I just want you to know you don't have to go there if you don't want to. But you've worked for media outlets like APTN, The New York Times, The Guardian, Al Jazeera, National Geographic. You've shed light on so many people's stories through your reporting. So why did you decide to tell your own story in a memoir?
Yeah, so I've been telling these stories, like you said, for many years, and yes, this is an intimate story, and it's a devastating story. But when I'm out there, telling these stories, people are sharing those intimate details with me, and they're sharing these truths with the world. And I thought, with the platform that I have as a journalist, I can also share those truths and to give back, to provide insight, because I think that a lot of times our people aren't humanitized in the media. And, I wanted to give, a look into the life of a survivor such as myself, because, I've been very moved and impacted by this genocide of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and visiting the home where Tina Fontaine was raised. For those that are unfamiliar with Tina Fontaine, she was 15 years old, and her body was found dumped in the Winnipeg Red River. And I could have been her, and she could have been me. She could have been, a journalist for justice doing these big things. And so I thought, I wanted to bring attention, with these platforms that I had.
Well, you brought up Tina, and in the book you write about that meeting and how difficult it was for you to hold your emotions back. And I just want to read what you wrote in the book since you brought it up. You write, "Tina died, I survived. Tina died, I survived. I am her, she is me." I think it's safe to say that most of us would probably crawl into a fetal position, but you chose to use what happened to you as fuel. How were you able to do that?
Wow. I just, had this sense of fighting inside of me, like fighting to get out of that darkness that I was raised in and around. And I had this warrior spirit. There was just always this spark that there was something better. And so I found that through becoming a journalist, through a love of writing, through a love of people, and through doing what I do. It coincided with my own healing from the different traumas that I experienced, right? So it was just, it was a blessing in many ways.
Many parts of the book were hard to read, and I'm sure they were very difficult for you to write. What was it like to revisit some of the most traumatic experiences and painful memories that you went through?
So, believe it or not, revisiting and writing about my rape and escaping with my life wasn't the hardest part. Because,
what was the hardest part?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in a healing journey for many years and going through therapy and different things. The hardest part for me was going back to when I was completely broken and unable to take care of my children and neglecting my children and having my children taken from me. Revisiting when my daughter Faith, my firstborn, was 4 months old, and neglecting her, and the pain of revisiting how could I have done that. And I cried for days, remembering and going through those parts, and called my daughter Faith and, apologized and had this kind of beautiful full circle conversation with her, even though she doesn't remember anything, right? But that was the hardest for me. But I was also like so grateful because I was able to get my kids back. There's so many, of our children that are in the foster care system across this country, and the families aren't supported to get their children back, and so I also felt, very, very grateful.
I want to talk about the foster system in the country in a little bit, but I wanted to just have a follow-up on something that you just said, because in the book, you were very honest in the ways that you neglected your children. I think for a lot of us, we see ourselves in, we try to see ourselves in a positive light, but you were very honest about some of the things that you did. Did you worry about being judged or being misunderstood?
I did, for a little bit. I have worked very hard to be doing what I'm doing, and I did, wonder, would people be judging me or, questioning, my capability but it was so important to me to be authentic, to share these truths, because these truths are often just hidden away. They're brushed under the rug. We don't talk about them. And if they can't come to the surface, I don't really think that the healing or the understanding can come about for so many people. And even, when we talk about the intergenerational trauma or the impacts of things such as residential schools, our people didn't talk about them for years because it was too traumatic, or, there was violence, that came about, such as, racism and discrimination. I feel it's so important to speak truthfully and honestly. And I know that, it's helped other people. And when I have spoken, I have learned about others who have gone through things. Those have very much helped me, because then I think, man, if they could get through that, there's hope for me too.
And because some of your children are older, and I'm guessing they're able to, I don't know if they've read the book, but is this maybe a way for you to have that conversation, those painful conversations?
Absolutely. They have read the book. My son read it in a day, which was pretty amazing. And they've seen and experienced us going through some rough times growing up, but they also seen their mother who never gave up, their mother who kept striving, who kept fighting, and that is breaking the cycle. That is empowering for them, and they're really proud of me for that. So,
in the book, you talk about how stubborn you are and how you have this fire, and you are indeed a fighter and a warrior. But as you wrote in the book, you continue to battle the challenges rooted in cycles of addiction, abuse, and violence. Even when you became an accomplished reporter, you write in the book, I'm talking world changer, history maker, badass, mother warrior stuff. But the question that plagued me was, how could I be doing so well in my professional life, but epically failing in my personal life? Do you have an answer to that question?
Like I said, this journey of being successful as a journalist and, earning these accolades and such like that. At the same time, I was on a hardcore inner journey of healing. And as my career was moving up and up, my healing necessarily wasn't happening at the same rate. And it was frustrating for me because I thought, oh, it's all gonna be good once I get here and once this happens. But for me, I really believe that healing is a lifelong journey. And I'm still, going through that process. I'm still in counseling. I still need to do things. And even doing the work that I do, it's heavy, it's traumatic. going into a lot of these situations, dealing with, telling the stories of residential school survivors, or meeting with families whose, daughters and sisters have been murdered or missing, or, this is really hardcore stuff, right? And so it's a continual push to work through.
You mentioned the amount of work that you do, but also the impacts on it of, physically and emotionally it impacts you. How do you find a way to process those things? Because your life has been threatened, and to move forward and tell these stories.
I just, I think a lot of it is prayer. I get through a lot of it, by prayer and just, this belief in what I'm doing, that it's right and that it's essential. Like, I believe that the work that I do is human rights work and that there are literally lives on the line. When I'm dealing with this stuff, there's been times when I'm on the road and I'm so impacted that I'll have to take sleeping pills because I'm experiencing nightmares and, different things. But I get a release somewhat when the stories are out there, when the stories are published, or when they're broadcast, and when they're, given to the world. So, I just deal with it with prayer, with, talking to elders that I know, and just working through it as I go.
You write about intergenerational trauma that you experienced, yet you express so much love and empathy toward your mother and your family. How does your childhood and home life affect your approach to parenting your own children?
Oh, wow. Well, it's been hard. It's been a lot of, undoing, and that's a really tough question. It's different now. I have a 4-year-old now, and there's a large gap between her and my older kids. And back then, when I was raising my older kids, I was really in survival mode a lot. And they experienced a lot of, like, me having bouts of depression, or, I would, yell and things like that. And now that I have a 4-year-old, it's so much different. I'm not in survival mode, and I am more healed, and I'm able to give to her that love and what she needs. It's not to say that I didn't give that to my other children. It was a different experience. But it was, I really didn't have a lot to pull from. And again, it was a creating and learning as I went.
One of my favorite chapters of the book is when you write about your cocoon, and you write about the struggles she went through, and you also write about the struggles that your parents went through. And even though you had a lot of challenges with your parents, you have that empathy, you have that love and that protection. Where do you find the peace to forgive in the ways that they didn't show up for you as parents?
Oh, wow. There was a lot of, like, chaos, growing up. But there was a lot of love. We were rooted in that love. I may have felt lost. There may have, been times where I felt afraid, or I wasn't at home and I was going, back and forth with the foster care system. But we had those deep bonds of love. And I mean, I can't hold on to any of that poison of animosity or unforgiveness. I did go through that, through processing the anger, not really knowing, what it was. It was just reacting to those environments. But it's because I understand, and I give, grace for that. They didn't have the tools. They were working with what they had, to do the best that they could do. Their intention wasn't to hate or to harm. They worked with what they had. And so I think that's where, I draw from to forgive and to love.
And you also demonstrate that in your storytelling. Your mission has been to amplify the voices of Indigenous peoples, especially survivors of gender-based violence. How do you reconcile the ideas of activism and journalistic objectivity in that space? Yeah,
So, I I didn't go to journalism school. I had a passion for it and learned on the ground and kind of did this grassroots. I didn't know that, journalists aren't supposed to, connect with the people necessarily that they're telling these stories. It was always about building relationships for me and, getting wholly involved with these people in order to draw these stories out. I think that the way that many storytellers go about, this job has to change, especially in marginalized or Indigenous communities. There's so much harm that's been done there, and we have to start from the ground up. We have to start with, breaking down these barriers and become authentic. Like, you can have objectivity, but these are human beings that we're dealing with. I take these stories extremely seriously, and I am invested in them, and I'm invested and care about these people and these places. It doesn't mean that I don't include the facts and do well, in what I do.
Your own journey of reconnection to your Indigenous bloodlines and culture evolved over time. I mean, the first few pages of the book, just the way you wrote it, just makes you just stop. You feel the tears coming down your face because you didn't even know where you came from. Why is there a lack of awareness among some children and grandchildren of residential school survivors of who they are and where they come from?
I mean, that is a part of that disconnect, right? And it was the goal of assimilation to, change our identities and to, snuff all of that out. And so you have these gaps in the generations. And I knew what it was to be Indigenous, but I only knew it at a certain level. I didn't know it. I didn't know that our family came from a place and had been displaced, not far from where I grew up. I didn't know the deep roots and the beauty and the richness of who we are. And again, just like people didn't talk about residential schools, it was forgotten. People didn't talk. The people were punished.
And when you say punished, I just want to interject because you found the writings of your kukum, and she was talking about this stress that she had after she passed on she was going to hell because of who she was. So this stuff is really deeply ingrained.
Oh, absolutely. That's what they did. The churches in these schools, they drilled into the children that they were savages, and that if they didn't renounce their Indian heritage, that they would be damned to hell. And so this was a very real thing. Like, even my own kukum, she was a devout Catholic till she died. And it was ingrained into her. Even though she was proud Native woman, it was this deeply ingrained into her till the end.
She had this worry. You lived in and out of foster homes from the age of 6 until you were 18 years old. According to Statistics Canada, more than half of the children in Canadian foster homes are Indigenous, despite them making up less than 8% of the country's child population. What does that say about where Canada is when we do talk about reconciliation?
It says that we're in a mess. It's plain and simple. We're in a mess, and this is the fallout. This is the fallout of all of that violence, from the colonial agenda to the residential school to the 60s scoop to where we are now.
Does it break your heart? Because you were in those spaces, and some of the things that you experienced at such a young age, 13, locked away for 6 months, the things that you experienced through there, and people don't know about that.
I mean, of course it does, and there's kids that are dying even in these systems now, in the foster care system, because we're so overrepresented, and many of our people are lost, but things are changing. I do see hope. We are in a mess, but that trajectory is, starting to change course, finally.
Well, what role do you think journalism and storytelling play in truth and reconciliation?
Really huge, because the media has, a major influence over, societal perceptions, and can help place pressure onto the different authorities and systems to help make change, or just bring general awareness to help, get rid of racism and discrimination and hate. And so when our people aren't represented accurately or at all, then that is going to perpetuate a lot of this violence against our people, a lot of, the racism and the stereotyping and this and that. So it plays a huge role to get it right.
And when we talk about, I just want to go back to that question about objectivity and activism. When we talk about separating your lived experience from these kind of stories, it's impossible. Mm-hmm. Do you think that that's a kind of a way to shut out certain people from covering certain stories?
I don't know, because something that's really interesting, sometimes people would say to me, well, you can't cover these stories because you're Indigenous. And I would say, well, why are you covering these mainstream stories? You're white. It's the same thing. They have that lived experience in their own communities, right? So for me, I don't see it that way.
And when the Pope came to visit Canada and give their apology to residential school survivors, to several major media outlets, you covered it.
Yeah.
Do you see that? How important was for you and the communities that you're representing for you to be able to do that in that moment?
It was important. That was a difficult assignment. Just a lot of very mixed feelings about that whole experience. But I was thankful. Well, I mean, it's really hard to take it seriously. It's hard to take it in. I mean, it's heavy as it is, following one of the most powerful men in the world, around the country. I had gone to Rome as well. And, wondering if this is authentic and what will happen out of it, and just dealing with the heaviness of the survivors and everything. But I knew that it was historic, and I was thankful for that. I was thankful to be able to document and witness and experience these survivors that some of them had prayed for this to happen, for years and years. So, in that sense, yes.
Well, you've been reporting on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls for many years now. Have you seen changes and progress being made?
No, not in this genocide that we're in. No, not at all. We have the national inquiry that happened and their report that came out in 2019. Our women are still being murdered and going missing at alarming rates. In Vancouver lately, there's been multiple Indigenous women, even over the past year, that have been murdered. One as young, I think, was 13 years old. It's not slowing down, and I don't believe that enough's being done about it.
You were one, in the book you say how you could have been one of those women and girls. When you cover these stories and you see the lack of movement on the issue, you think what?
I just keep pushing. I just keep doing what I do to get these stories out there.
It makes you more determined?
It makes me more determined, absolutely. I don't want to stop. And, I just want to bring these faces to the forefront, that maybe these stories and these people would reverberate in the hearts of other people, that they would be moved to do something. Because, I always say, people say that, oh, if they knew what was going on in the residential school system at the time when these children were being stolen from their families, when they were being experimented on and abused and even dying, that they would have done something. But I question that, because there's so many things that are happening right now, such as this genocide and other atrocities right now. And what are they doing?
In the book, you write that you're tired of being the hunted, that you are going to become the hunter. And in the book, you also write about all these people that you take care of. How do you take care of yourself?
Oh, wow. That's something that I'm learning every, as I go as well. Again, this work really drives me in everything that I do. I consider it a purpose. Again, I have a lot of prayer. I have people, supports that I get through, and just take it step by step.
And you're up for a huge award. You're receiving a huge award. Can you tell us that in our final moments?
Absolutely. So I learned recently that I won one of the most prestigious awards in the world for journalism, an Edward R. Murrow Award. And it was actually for my series with Al Jazeera English on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, the Highway of Tears, and the correlations between the violence that industry brings in. And I'm going in a week to go to New York City to accept that award. And the reason why this is like massive is because we've been fighting for these stories to get to the mainstream for so many years. And to get this top award is huge. That is our voices coming to the forefront. So I'm gonna walk that red carpet.
You're going to shine on the red carpet.
Yes.
Congratulations. Everything that you've experienced in this book, so many people can get from. You almost gave up so many times, but you refused. You just kept moving forward. Congratulations on everything. And thank you so much for sharing so much of yourself with us tonight. We appreciate it.
Hi. Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.